Thank you very much, Joanna, for the introduction. And first of all, thank you very much too for the fundings we got for our project. Yeah, our tandem project is over now, actually, since some months, but nevertheless, we're here and we're going to present our results finally. The structure of our talk is pretty clear and short. So we're going to talk about how the tandem actually started, our research methods, the analysis, and the conclusions and outlook. I forgot actually to read out loud our topic. Me, myself, I'm linguist, and Aren is social scientist working from or in the Memorial Society. And so together in our tandem, we explored the documents of the Memorial Society with some assistance of AI and linguistics and corpus linguistics and so on. But we want to talk about this in the second step of our talk, the research methods, then the actual analysis we did in our tandem, and last but not least, the conclusions and the outlook. Hopefully there is outlook and future for our tandem. And so how everything started, it started as a cooperation between the multi-HTR project from the Slavic linguistics of the Slavic department at our university, University of Freiburg, and the International Memorial Association. And because actually both of us dealt particularly with the same situation, that we had many difficult cases of handwriting. On the other hand, the Memorial Society, and we needed many and as well difficult cases of handwriting for training AI algorithms which can automatically transliterate such handwritings. And so we first started with probably the most interesting cases and made some experiments with such documents, as you can see here. So all of the documents we are dealing are from people who were sentenced in the Gulag camps, or actually all of these people. And so the material conditions of the documents can be very bad, as you can see here, for example, these letters. And we as well had some other interesting cases, as you can see here. So where people wrote a letter on a piece of paper, and this piece of paper was at the same time the only material piece of paper which was then sent to home or somewhere else. So there were no
envelopes.
Envelopes. But in such cases, we weren't successful. So such documents are still very, very hard to work with, even with AI technologies. But nevertheless, we had as well other documents where we were very successful. Once again, the complementary interests of our tandem partnership was, on the one hand, Memorial, who wants and tries and actually is making a large amount of such texts accessible to the society and to the scientists and so on. And on the other hand, it is, or was now, the project unfortunately is over too, the multi-HTR project, which needed training data for new AI transliteration models. And so our common ground was then the processing of Soviet Gulag history more efficiently. So because of course you can transliterate such documents manually, but I will show it in one case, it can take very much time and very much work.
Here goes my part of presentation. I will tell about the history of Memorial Society. In late 80s, in the Soviet Union has begun perestroika, a political reform movement within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and during this period of a sudden political freedom, a lot of civic movements emerged, and one of them was initial group Memorial, later known as Memorial Society. Society's main goal was to document the crimes against humanity committed in the USSR. First time society organized exhibitions, first in the USSR history, exhibitions about Soviet repressions, war crimes. Members of society collected testimonies of victims of political repressions, held political actions, etc. Couple examples, like for example, in 1990, members of Memorial published an article in a Soviet newspaper on Ostarbeiters and urged its readers to send their stories. In the next few months, they received over 400,000 letters from former Ostarbeiters and their families. For another example, the same year, 1990, on October 30, Memorial activists, they brought from the Solovki Islands, it's north of Russia, they brought, and Solovki Islands was infamous and one of the biggest prison camps in Gulag. They brought from these islands a large stone, you can see on a picture, and put it up in the center of Moscow at Lubyanka Square, right in front of Moscow office of KGB, now modern FSB. Next, please. What Memorial have done next 30 years? A lot of different activities, but I will try to tell shortly. First of all, were established famous memorial archive and library collections. Also, they helped to draft a law on rehabilitation of victims of political repressions, the law that later was passed by Russian parliament and still exists. They organized meetings of Soviet political prisoners in different Russian cities. They located the massacre sites, and of course, like a lot of historical books, articles on Soviet repressions, exhibitions, theater plays, etc. Here I have to tell that since 90s, Memorial has two different entities or departments. First one is the educational department, and second is the human rights center. And we work separately, but like together we are one organization, Memorial Society. Next. A few words about collection that we also document from where we used it's archive, library, database. You can see that it's containing about tens of thousands different documents and files. Yeah, and it's manuscripts, handwritten. It's paintings, it's memoirs, photographs, but what is important, all these documents from former political prisoners, Gulag camp prisoners, former Ostarbeiters, etc. They were brought to memorial office voluntarily. So all these tens of thousands documents, it's from people who brought it to Russian office. Uzbekistan, I didn't say, but yeah, memorial emerged almost in each republics of former Soviet Union. It's like not only in Russia, it's also in Ukraine, in Armenia, in Georgia, in Kazakhstan, etc. And memorial also has several databases, and we took our files for our project from one of memorial databases of handwritten texts of former Gulag camp prisoners. In October 22, Memorial was one of the three laureates of that year's Nobel Peace Prize. But I would like to tell that by this time, organization was officially liquidated in Russia by Russian government. And this was preceded by years of pressure from the government, police, FSB, etc. And I don't know, I don't think that I have to tell all examples how it's happened, but in 2021, in December, organization was officially liquidated in Russia. And what is really important, it happened a few months later after liquidation of Memorial, Russian full invasion of Ukraine started. And according to many experts, cleansing of Russian civil society started from the liquidation of Memorial. In 2023, 15 organizations of Memorial Network from Russia, Ukraine, European Union, and Israel, they created new organization, International Memorial Association, which continues to Memorial's work. Goals are, I would say, similar, but like for this moment, it's the most important to cover in social media Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. And also organize new exhibitions and educational projects in Europe, especially in Germany, where notable part of members of Memorial workers have, how to say, immigrated from Russia after the war in Ukraine started. Next, what I have done, I have been working in Memorial since 2017, almost 7 years. I came as a researcher for one educational project. Then I participated in digitizing Memorial archive documents, such as investigation files that's from Russian State Archive. Etc. And also I participated in production, or still participate in production of media products such as podcasts about injustice in Soviet era or in modern Russian. I think this was the story.
And so, of course, we couldn't process all those documents somehow during the about 6 months of our tandem partnership, but nevertheless, the first step of our tandem was to search actually in the Memorial database for the relevant documents, so which are mostly handwritten and are unprocessed. So we wanted to work with really documents which maybe like 2 or 3 persons dealt before us, so only digitized. We wanted as well work and try our skills with various scan and photo qualities. So we didn't take only the good scans and only the good photos, but we as well tried to process maybe not so good from the quality, from the visual quality, but from a high quality in regards of the content. And our aim for this 6 months was to process 400 to 600 pages of such documents, and in 2 languages, Ukrainian and Russian. So then in the second step, we found those documents and processed them with the AI-based technologies of transcribers, where we used already existing models or retrained models, which are most of them were created in the multi-HDR project. And you can imagine this work not as just upload the data to transcribers and then wait like minutes or hours or whatever, and then you get your text. No, we had like multiple rounds of fine-tuning and manually correcting and so on the transcriptions to retrain the model so for example, we like processed 10 pages, then we corrected the transliteration, then we again retrained the models and so on, so that every time we used the model, every time the model should be better and the results should be better, so that our work should be in the end, should work in the most efficient way. In the third step, we then defined keywords, specific words in context, or we search them for their context using corpus linguistic methods, special in this case, the Sketch Engine software. And then in the end, we then made actually our analysis and the interpretation of these keywords in context by so-called distance reading, which means it wasn't necessary to really read all those like 500 pages word by word, but searching for these keywords and then looking for the context of these keywords actually shows you the let's say the main message of this whole document. But nevertheless, we used not only the like quantitative methods, but as well qualitative, so from the zoom out to the zoom in into the text. And here is one example of such keywords in context. So here we searched for the lexeme mova in Ukrainian, which means language, and one of relevant context, or as well interesting context, translated from Ukrainian, written by the former inmate of a gulag, Aleksej, and he wrote this document in the 50s. The surgeon was preparing for the operation. As I was leaving the hospital, I met a young German who was accompanied by 2 elderly prisoners, also Germans. Since they did not know Russian well, and I didn't know German, we communicated using surjik of Russian and German. And besides the communication structures in the gulags, for us linguists, the interesting point here is using the word surjik to describe the combination of Russian and German, because actually surjik is a spoken variety of Ukrainian, which is strong influenced by Russian. But in this case, it is probably Russian influenced by German or German influenced by Russian. But however, Aleksej defined it here as a Surgic communication. And yeah, for you it was a new technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's examples of texts that we worked with. Russian language, Ukrainian languages text, handwriting, typewriting. Of course, with typewriting text, it was easier. Like handwriting, it was a little bit more difficult. Your example of Ukrainian text. As I remember, it's with Ukrainian dissidents text Kritak about uprising in Gulag. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So, for example, dealing with such texts, it was really interesting job for us because on the one hand it didn't took much time to process such text because it's typewritten and it makes a very big difference to the handwritten texts. And on the other hand, the content of this document written by Aleksej is really impressive, and we will show some more examples in this presentation. So then finally to our actually analysis in the tandem. So we compiled a so-called pilot corpus, so a collection of texts to review the data's quality for further corpus expansion. So it would be very nice to make a bigger corpus after the tandem. And of course, to review our research questions and the adequacy of our methods. So if it's good what we are doing, if it's really adequate what we are doing, and as well to provide the first interim results from our research in this 6 months. And in total, we processed about 84,000 tokens during the 6 months, and tokens in linguistics is not the same as words, so these are word forms, punctuation, numbers, and so on and so on. So we could say that it's like about maybe 80,000 words or word forms. But speaking in corpus linguistics language, these are 48,000 tokens. And yeah, and so written by 6 people, 4 of them are of Ukrainian origin, 1 of Jewish, and 1 of Cherkess. It wasn't actually our aim to make some kind of, let's say, whatever national or ethnic or whatever design or compilation for our corpus. So we just looked up, like in the database, for unprocessed texts of people with non-Russian surnames. And like the first 6 cases we found have been 4 Ukrainians, 1 Cherkess, and 1 Jewish. Again here, so the Russian texts or texts in Russian are making here 67%, and texts in Ukrainian 33%. And in the end, we could draw, which was actually our aim to process between 400 and 600 pages. And for the analysis itself, we defined 27 keywords, and the context means the left and the right from the keyword. So what does this sentence or the sentences say? But as well, we have looked into the frequencies of such keywords. So the information of how intense or maybe, so how often these words or these lexemes are used and in which context, or maybe are not used. I mean, the non-usage of keywords is a message too, and we will come to this later. So here is a random order of our keywords in Russian and Ukrainian and the English translation, and these keywords were defined to explore the concepts of language, nation, and oppression in those manuscripts we found. And I won't read out loud now all these 27 keywords here in the random order, but those keywords are, of course, such lexemes as language, as native or mother language, Christianity, homeland, home, as a nation and nation. So there is a difference. We will see this later. Two states, society, Soviet fatherland, and so on and so on. And already in this step, it was actually fascinating. By getting 68% of the contexts from Russian text and 32% as a proportion of the Ukrainian and the Russian text, which means that obviously we have chosen the right words. And so we get 352 keywords, and here they are sorted by their frequencies in descending order. And you can see them. Good? Okay, yeah, seems so. In the top 10 keywords by their frequencies, 8 were the same, actually. So 8 of 10 keywords, for example, people as a nation, so narod. We see it here in the Russian text or manuscripts on the first position, and in the Ukrainian text on the fourth position. Then we have Ukrainian, which is used in the Ukrainian text on the first position, and in the Russian text on the fourth position, which as well shows to us the relevance of something Ukrainian in the Russian texts. And then actually very interesting that nation as Naция was on the same position in regarding the frequencies in the Russian and Ukrainian texts, and as well the mother or native something was as well on the same position, the position number 8 in Russian and Ukrainian text, but there were some differences, as for example, Jew, the word Jew was on the second position in the Russian text, but wasn't at all subject for the Ukrainian text. We got there 0 results. And so what do the 352 contexts say now? Okay, context, but nevertheless, we tried to find the sum of representative examples, and we actually our method of research, we have been using the whole tandem, so from quantity to quality and back to quantity. So from the distant reading to closer reading to the close reading, and then back to the statistics. And before we start with the examples, we have to warn that there will be contexts which conspiracy myth, and it's very important to have in mind that those texts or those opinions are not our opinions as presenters, but these are citations from the manuscripts. First of all, which was probably the most hard case. It was a text written by Baitalsky in Russian, which he titled as "Born in the Minority." And as you can see here, the quality is not the best, but actually we have chosen right at the start of the text to make this to make you understand what this text is about, which is kind of an essay of Baitalsky. Born in the minority, there are 109,000 Tatars living in Moscow. Yet in the street crowd, in the packed metro, or in a shop, you wouldn't be able to distinguish a Tatar. This happens because an ethnic minority is perceived as such only when not only differs ethnically, but also, here is a missing part, there are more Jews in Moscow than Tatars, 250,000. I'll add that both figures come from census data and represent people who identify themselves as Tatars or Jews. One might think that Jews should not be more noticeable than Tatars, especially since they speak Russian fluently, surprise, surprise, and generally try not to stand out. So why are they recognized in the street, the metro, and the shop? Most often, of course, they are recognized by their facial features. But Jews don't differ from Russians, Ukrainian, Mordvins, or other historically native people of Russia in their facial features any more than Tatars do. The issue is that people have learned, whether consciously or subconsciously, to recognize Jews by insignificant subtle traits, while they haven't learned to recognize Tatars by their equally subtle features. I'm not saying that only Russians can't identify Jews. Jews themselves also don't recognize each other. People are not inclined to learn what they are indifferent to. If they can distinguish a Jew more easily than a Tatar, it means a Jew is less indifferent to them than a Tatar, which is a very interesting context in regards of the international and multi-ethnic, multicultural society of the Soviet Union, where all people should be equal. And which by the definition is or was some kind of an anti-fascist society and so on. So with this text, the problem was that it's actually a draft of an essay and there is no final text. So we dealt with this draft. We manually transliterated 2 pages. It took us about 3 days of work in our team to translate 2 pages of 68 pages of this essay. And after transliterating 2 pages in 3 days, we decided that unfortunately we cannot deal with this text because it takes just too much time. But as you can see, only from the first page, it seems to be very relevant actually for the decolonial perspective of processing Soviet history and Soviet colonial history. And another context is from Efendiyev, who is Cherkess. The translator, Greek by nationality, turned out to have been a teacher of German at secondary school. When he took a drag of his Mahorka, one day we got into a conversation about the deportation of the people of Caucasus from their native land to the eastern regions of the USSR during the Great Patriotic War. At this point, his face twisted into a grimace of hatred towards those responsible for the tragedy of his people, the Greeks in the Soviet Union. Yeah, maybe not an obvious group, but yeah. Asia, where they had lived for centuries, were deported to Central Asia. I was born in Central Asia, he added. After Stalin's death, Khrushchev allowed us to return to our homeland. We were not in the zone of Hitler's army occupation during the war, and therefore we could not have collaborated with the Germans, so the Soviet authorities had no grounds for exporting. He said indignantly. In turn, I told him how the Meskhetian Turks from the southern regions of Georgia had been forcibly deported to Uzbekistan, and to this day, like Crimean Tatars, they remain exiled in Central Asia, so they weren't allowed to come back. And so here, of course, the historical context is very, fascinating from the researcher's perspective, because we see here that the impending German occupation was used as the official reason for deportation of people, but actually it was made not for like rescue or secure reasons, but actually to prevent collaborationism among the Soviet people. So the Soviet government obviously their cooperation with the occupation army. So there were obviously a thought that those people could realistically cooperate with the new government, so to say. But we see here as well that the deportations took as well place with native people of different regions, in regions that were not at risk of occupation. So the risk of occupation was as well used in regions which weren't occupied. And then probably one of the most intriguing and most of emotional, difficult topics is in the context of narod, so the people of nation. And as we saw, it seems that narod is one really of the central keywords for those documents, because they are so different facets of the lexeme narod in these manuscripts. So people as a nation. And for example, Marushak writes in Russian, in my forced labor construction teams, there were people of various nationalities, Russian, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Ukrainians. Among them were very cultured and educated individuals. Initially, there were also women's brigades, all artificially created enemies of the people of the, or the so-called ЧСВН, so family members of the enemies of the Soviet people. So it was enough to be the son or a daughter or wife or husband of an enemy of the Soviet people, of the Soviet narod. So spend the rest of the life in a gulag. And so I remember some of the ЧСВН, so of the so-called enemies of the people. Dr. Shulman, Ekaterina Osipovna, Elena Glebovna Boki, Nina Mikhailovna Kleonskaya, Stepan Matveyevich Gorshkov, a worker of the Central Committee of the Komsomol, the Dr. Badyan, engineer Traub, and others. So, and here the interesting observation is that first he writes about that the construction team, the forced labor construction team, consists of different nationalities, Russians, Uzbeks, Tajiks, and so on. But then the first names which are coming to his mind, actually only one of 7 names is Russian. So they are German names, Jewish names, Ukrainian names, but only one of the 7 names is Russian. And this is and somehow here he obviously needs to add a comment to this. Only one, okay, he as well wrote Dr. Badyan and engineer Traub, but for the Russian name, he wrote a worker of the Central Committee of the Komsomol. So it's a former, actually, part of the system who somehow, then became one of the prisoners. And another context written by Chumak in Russian, as for the famine, the Holodomor genocide in Ukraine, the political officer mumbled something unclear about the necessity of rapidly building socialism, which was associated with inventable sacrifices for the sake of future success and about hidden enemies of the Soviet people. So always millions of Ukrainians have to had to die because of the future success, and which required at most vigilance and their eradication and so on. At the end of the conversation, he strongly recommended that I immediately read The Capital by Karl Marx, where I would find the peasant principles of building socialism and the future steps towards communism. So an obvious answer to a question, why the Holodomor happened in Ukraine, is to read Karl Marx. The third context here, written by Tikhonov in discovered so many enemies of the Soviet people. So, and this part war was over, and the Soviet regime needed a new reason to bring more people to the gulags. So, and at this very moment, the term of the enemy of the Soviet people appeared in this reality. And going on with the concept of narod, so people as a nation, an explanation for what happened after 45, the country, or before 45 and after 45. The country needs gold, which is used to buy many things necessary to the war front, and the mines swallow and grind as a giant meat grinder the very people who extract with their literally hard labor, paying with their blood and life for this very gold. In exchange for those who have dropped out, a replacement was required. And so after a cursory medical sorting, they rake out little by little from everywhere, little by little, the people prisoners who had rested after the mines, again to the mines, 50 pieces of slaves, as the officers and the owners of living goods put it, were sorted out and out at our peat mining site to be sent to the famous Chai Uria mine located at the Chai Uria Valley, or as it was called in our circles of prisoners, the Valley of Death, and where this Chai Uria is here marked with a green circle on the Soviet map. So we see obviously then that the system tried to make former prisoners to prisoners again, because obviously they are enemies of the people. And the officers working in the gulags used words as 50 pieces of slaves. So for this kind of work, for the gold mining, we need 50 more pieces of slaves for our work. And coming back to our case with Hritsak, the only but a very long text written in Ukrainian. Hritsak is contexted as somebody who tried to make a revolt, a strike in a gulag camp in Norilsk. Norilsk is as well here marked with a green circle on the Soviet map. And actually these riots had to do with six things the prisoners were asking their officers to implement in the camp. On the same day, Officer Kuznetsov read to us that the government had considered our application and decided they decided to implement those improvements in the camp, replace the management of Gulag. So and here we see like the difference of Gulag and Gulag. So from the official point of view, it wasn't a Gulag, it was a Gulag in this case. Reduce the working day to 8 hours, guarantee days off, allow prisoners to send 2 letters a month and receive visits from their families, remove locks and bars from the barracks and numbers from the prisoners' clothing, so they haven't no names but numbers, and to take all the disabled out of Norilsk, so as well disabled people were in sentence and had to work in these camps. This was the victorious end to the first stage of our struggle, which went far beyond the scope and the significance of an ordinary strike. So they did a strike, they wanted improvements, and then the officer said, okay, you get your improvements, and then like days later, the whole story actually went a completely different way. So Hritsak, the author of this manuscript, had to come personally to the officer. We will take these numbers off you. They are not necessary for you or us. By the way, did you come here yourself, or did the people, and here in this case the inmates are the people, sent you? I pointed to the prisoners who stood 30 or 40 meters away. There are no calluses on your hands. So here the officer is somehow interpreting that Hritsak is actually not working somehow at the camp, but only making strikes and trying whatever, but he's not working. Now everything is clear to me. The people, so the narod, and here it means the inmates, want to work. But it is you, Hritsak, who is holding them with a knife point. We will take to the people, we will talk to the people without you, Hritsak. I lifted up the hem of my jacket and said, look, where do I have the knives? And this is only the first step of the officer's work in this strike situation. It goes on by Hritsak's story. Latvians, Poles, and Germans did the same. I was in direct contact with the other national groups from the very beginning. After all this, another delegation approached me to establish contact. We are Germans, Nemts in this case, they said. I looked at them in surprise and explained that this was a misunderstanding, that I had already met Germans, Nemci, and was in good contact with them. When I explained their Lord, what kind of Germans, Nemci, are they? They are Germans, Germanцы, or people from Germany. The real Germans are us, the Russian Germans, or the Russian Nemцы. In this way, each national group expressed a desire to continue the struggle together, the strike. But at the same time, opposition groups were also consolidating. They became more and more vocal in their demands for an end to the struggle. And now comes actually the reason why an opposition was built. Flyers appeared calling on the prisoners to surrender. So the officers produced some flyers to explain to the prisoners why this strike of the prisoners is happening. And you wouldn't believe why this strike is happening. On top of all things, the administration managed to spread among the prisoners the fiction that the unrest, as they call the strike, in Norilsk was caused by Ukrainians. Yeah, so in the far north of Norilsk, which is really far away from Ukraine, and it was caused by Ukrainians in order to take advantage and the opportunity to tear the Soviet polar region away from Russia, not from the Soviet Union, but away from Russia, and annex it to Ukraine. A story that could happen today, obviously. Isn't that ridiculous? Hritsak is asking himself. And the last context from Hritsak's manuscript we want to speak about, and here, because the context is about language, Mova, I as well show you the original text. With our language, we identified ourselves as Ukrainians, or as we disrespectfully called everywhere, banderas, and brought upon ourselves as fruit of all kinds of additional harassment and oppression. In Karaganda, so like the first step of the deportation, we had already won the right to our national dignity, but here in Norilsk, so I don't know, like 500,000 kilometers from Karaganda, we still had to fight for it. And so during among this 352 contexts, we saw as well with this context, so left and right from the lexemes, but as well in the frequencies that the term Narod, so the people, or das Volk vielleicht, or maybe in German, is really a central term for this manuscript. And, sorry, wrong direction. And that in the point of view of the authors or the scribes of this manuscripts, the narod is consisting, the people are consisting of different nations. Yeah, so there is a nation A, Nacija, Nacija B, Nacija C, Nacija D, and so on. But from the state, from the official point of view, the narod is not consisting of different nations, it's consisting of state, land, and fatherland. So the narod is the same as the state, land, and fatherland, and there are no nations in this narod. We are all one Soviet narod, so to say. But it's interesting that the state representatives themselves differ among the different kinds of narod. So they use the same lexeme, but in different contexts, as for example, the neutral context is the people or das Volk in general, then the Soviet people, which is not neutral, but like political nation, or das sowjetische Volk, the inmates in the constellation versus the Gulag officers. So in this case, Gulag officers are the state and narod are the prisoners. In the fourth context we could find are the people, the narod, versus the government in Moscow. So government in Moscow is the state, and we who are not in Moscow and who are not a part of the government, we are the narod. And you remember this statistics. The interesting thing is about not using words or lexemes too. As we can see here, the word discrimination had zero frequency in Russian and Ukrainian. Okay, I mean, it's like a loan word, and maybe they just used other words because there are other words in Russian and Ukrainian to express this, like this action of oppression. But we see here as well that oppression and other words as well have here zero frequencies. So we were asking ourselves, didn't the lexeme discrimination exist in the USSR in the Russian and Ukrainian language? And first thing we did was using, thanks to the Russian government, financed by the Russian government corpus, Russian national corpus, to have a look how the lexeme discrimination was used during the Soviet time. So we just searched for the paradigm of the lexeme discrimination, and surprise, surprise, we got 870 contexts from 881 texts between 1934 and 2019. So in the Soviet time and in the post-Soviet time. So the word discrimination is obviously not a post-Soviet thing. It already exists in the Soviet Union. And the next, really probably most, one of the most interesting things here is now to have a look in which context the word discrimination was used between 34, so the first time it came up in the corpus, in the Russian national corpus, and let's say one of the last years of the Soviet Union, 1989. So there are 20 shades of discrimination you were allowed to write about in the USSR. And based on the data from Russian national corpus, as I said, from the years 1934 and 1989. The first time the word discrimination came up is in 1934 in the context of discrimination of Jews in Nazi Germany. So already in the early 30s, in Soviet Union or people in Soviet Union have been writing about the discrimination of Jews in Nazi Germany. So far, so good, okay. And then the longest period, the word discrimination was used in two contexts. The one, discrimination of Soviet Union on the global market and in global politics, was used between 34 and 89. And the second, probably, or as obviously we can see here, the most relevant discrimination, kind of discrimination, is discrimination of people of color in the US. So Soviet press, Soviet writers, and so everything of what the national corpus is consisting. So two longest contexts are discrimination of the Soviet Union on the market and the discrimination of people of color in the US. Obviously, these are two most important contexts. The other interesting context is the discriminations of Christians in the USSR. So far, so good, okay, but only 2 years long, from 61 to 63, or 2 years long, somebody have been writing about the discrimination of Christians. And then, right after that, in 67, from 67 to 76, we find text about the discrimination of atheists and non-Christians by Christians before the October Revolution. So you have to process this constellation of discrimination as a reaction to the mention of discrimination of Christians in the USSR. So they needed like 10 years to talk about discrimination of atheists and non-Christians by Christians in the Tsarist Russia. And another interesting thing is then to ask the question, what exactly is discrimination in those 10 years? The discrimination of Soviet citizens in Japan, discrimination of scientists in Ukraine, whatever, probably the same story as the annexation of polar north of Russia to Ukraine, whatever. And then the mutual discrimination at film festivals within the Warsaw Pact, where the topic was that the filmmakers from Hungary are not invited, people from Czechoslovakia and people from Poland are not inviting the Czechoslovaks, and so on. And then, beginning with 1934 and ending with 51, so which is like historically obvious why in this period the Soviet Union or people in Soviet Union were writing about discrimination of Jews in Nazi Germany. But then in 1970, the topic appears again, but not in the context of Nazi Germany, but in the context of USSR. And only 6 years, it is a topic, the discrimination of Jews in the USSR and the migration of Jews from USSR to Israel as a consequence of discriminations of Jews in the USSR. So 6 years, yeah, and then again, like in the case with the Christians, comes the reaction from like the officials who then talk from the 90s or right from 1975 to 1989 about the discrimination of rural inhabitants, non-existence of anti-Semitic discrimination in the USSR, and the discrimination of Catholics in the US. A very obvious topic for Soviet press. Then discrimination by age in the USSR, okay. Discrimination in Israel, educational discrimination in the USA, Great Britain, France, and West Germany. You're welcome. Discrimination of homosexuals in the US, religious discrimination in Romania, and last but not least, retrospective views on discrimination of several groups of people, political dissidents, Jews, Germans, religious people, and so on, in the USSR. But in case of Jews and Germans, there have been only economical reasons for their migration. So not the discrimination during the whole Soviet time was the reason for the migration, but only the economical reasons were put as the only reasons for their migration of Jews and Germans. So let us talk about our results. So from technical point of view, we could transcribe over 450 handwritten and typewritten pages in 6 months. We used transcribers and corpus linguistics, as you saw, and I think it's obvious that these methods are adequate for this kind of questions, and we could as well reuse the data to train new models and to process new texts, which is from our point of view technical and academic sustainable. And we could as well publish 2 new models, for one from Ukrainian and one for Russian, which now can not only read the handwritten text, but typewritten and handwritten text. And the, so to say, semantic results are that we could find over 340 references to racist and ethnic-based discrimination within the Gulag system. People, Narod, and the nation, Nazi, can be understood as opposing terms, that there have been a long exclusion of anti-Semitic discrimination in the USSR. It simply didn't exist officially. And there was a long tradition of discrimination campaigns, really not individual discrimination, but as you saw with the example as the annexation of polar regions to Ukraine, or the discrimination of scientists in Ukraine. So these are really campaigns and anti-Ukrainian work within the state security services. The use of Ukrainian in particular was not welcomed in the camps and usually politicized by the authorities. And last but not least, the discrimination in the USSR officially had many faces, but almost never related to the Soviet reality actually, but to foreign countries and international politics and relations. And so our outlook, we are now working on an article for the Journal of Preservation, Digital Technology and Culture by the Reuters. We hope to process further relevant data from the memorial archives, hopefully write a potential third-party funding application and make some other publication and book projects. And one of the open questions we have in the end, will semi-automatic AI-based transcription of draft text, so with the text of Baitalsky, for example, with numerous deletions, insertions, and corrections, be possible, or will it remain a human task for us to make it manually because AI still cannot read such texts? And in the end, I want to read out one more context written by Chumak in Russian and translated here to English. By expanding democracy and deepening reasonable glassness, we will move forward on the road to perestroika. And this only in this the pledge of peace, happiness, and general well-being, not in words, but in the reality. And about those incalculable victims among all classes and nationalities of our vast country, which were the result of extreme despotism and enslavement organized by Stalin and his admirers, of whom some are still living comfortably, provided with personal pensions and other benefits. We must always remember, as well as those who gave their lives on the front of the Great Patriotic War. And thank you very much for your time and questions, please.